Everyone thinks they know what a witch looks like. Pointed hat, broomstick, black cat by the cauldron. The perfect Halloween costume. But what if I told you that image is barely 200 years old? The witch has been alive in our stories for over 4,000. She began as a healer, a goddess, became a monster, was burned as a heretic, and today she's trending on TikTok. So how did a figure once feared as the devil's bride become a Disney villain, a teen rebel, and now an aesthetic on our For You page? And how did the witch survive every era? And why does she always come back? Because the witch isn't really about magic at all. Our story today starts over 4,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia. The figure we now call witch was already here, only she didn't go by that name. Back then, she was a goddess, a healer, a monster. It depended on who you asked. Mesopotamia was the cradle of civilization, and the first place people began writing down magic. Clay tablets from ancient Sumer and Babylon describe incantations, protective charms, and rituals to summon or banish spirits. They believed sickness could be caused by demons, and the cure wasn't medicine, it was spells, herbs, and chants. The earliest witch wasn't flying on a broom. They were a ritual specialist, a healer, a sorcerer, someone who lived half in the village and half in the spirit world. Before the word witch even existed, Mesopotamia gave us the blueprint, power drawn from the unseen, and the fear of what happens when that power is misused. Then there's Isis, the Egyptian goddess who wasn't demonized at all. She was adored. Worship of Isis goes back to the Old Kingdom. That's 2,500 years before Homer even sharpened his quill. She was the sorceress queen of Egypt, patron of healing, protector of the dead, and most famously, the goddess who stitched Osiris back together after he was hacked into pieces. By the time Rome rolled around, her following stretched across the Mediterranean. Everyone wanted a piece of her magic, from farmers to emperors. To call her a witch would have been blasphemy, and yet her toolkit is exactly what later witches would be accused of: potions, protection, necromancy. She shows us the paradox. What one culture worships as divine, another calls dangerous. Meanwhile, in the north, the Vikings practiced Seithur, a kind of shamanic magic that blurred the lines between fate and free will. It was a Norse magical practice involving prophecy, fate weaving, and sometimes curses. It's described in Old Norse sagas and later written sources like Snorri Sturluson's prose Edda. The goddess Freya was its queen. She was the Vanir goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, and is explicitly associated with Seithur. Many myths say she taught it to the Aesir gods. Odin himself, king of the gods, dabbled in it too, using it for prophecy and manipulating fate. But here's the twist. Men practicing Seithur were ridiculed because Norse culture prized warrior masculinity. Men who did Seithur could be mocked as unmanly, even though Odin himself practiced it. The witch became a gendered insult, power reframed as shame. And finally, Circe, the sorceress of Homer's Odyssey, a lonely woman on an island who turned Odysseus's sailors into pigs. Circe is often called the first witch in Western literature. She's not evil, exactly. She was just a woman who wanted to be left alone, that happens to have magic, knowledge, and power. Circe is just the beginning. Greek culture is full of witches. Medea, priestess of Hecate, who helped Jason with potions and curses before being cast as a monster. Hecate herself, goddess of crossroads and ghosts, invoked in midnight rituals. The Greeks practiced rituals in what we would call witchcraft today. Ordinary people carved curses onto lead tablets, hiding them in graves to call on the dead. And in the Greek magical papyri, you can still read their spellbooks, instructions for summoning spirits, binding lovers, or striking enemies. And their gods, playwrights, and everyday citizens all helped shape the figure we'd later call the witch. So before there were witches, there were goddesses, demons, healers, sorceresses. Some worshipped, some feared, but all carrying the same DNA of what we'd later call witchcraft, living in that liminal space between human and powerful. Fast forward a few thousand years, the goddess becomes a heretic, the healer becomes a criminal, and the word witch, it becomes a death sentence. Historically, witches were believed to be people who had become agents of the devil and given magic powers, and could be either male or female. Witchcraft was evidenced by two things: a pact with the devil to harm the church and the performing of evil deeds. In 1487, two German clergymen published the Malleus Maleficarum, literally the hammer of witches. It wasn't just a book, it was a manual for fear. Step-by-step instructions on how to spot, interrogate, and kill a witch. It sold faster than a medieval iPhone, second only to the Bible in popularity. The authors said women were weaker, more carnal, more prone to the devil. Since they are feebler both in mind and body, it is not surprising that they should come more under the spell of witchcraft. For as regards intellect, or the understanding of spiritual things, they seem to be of a different nature from men, a fact which is clear from their many foolish actions. Kramer's theory of witchcraft suggested that the only way to rid the world of the evils of witchcraft was by eliminating those who practiced it, and people listened. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, tens of thousands of men and women across Europe, especially in Germany and Scotland, were accused, tortured, and executed, sometimes for healing herbs, sometimes for a bad harvest, sometimes for a land grab, or maybe just because a neighbor didn't like their existence. You didn't need evidence, you just needed a rumor. Imagine living in a world where gossip could get you imprisoned, or worse. This video could have easily been twice as long. If you want the rest of the story, what I couldn't fit in this one, including the Salem witch trials, let me know in the comments. The witch didn't stay trapped in the trial records. She walked into our stories, and every generation rewrote her. So naturally, the next stop is in the fairy tale. In Hansel and Gretel, written down by the Brothers Grimm in 1812, the witch lives in a gingerbread house. She lures starving children, fattens the boy for slaughter, and burns in her own oven. This story wasn't really about magic. It was about famine. So parents told children cautionary tales. Don't stray into the woods. Don't trust strangers. The witch became hunger in human form, an explanation for why children disappear. And the Grimm brothers, they weren't inventing witches from scratch. They were collecting oral stories passed through villages, often darker than what ended up on the page. In these retellings, the witch is stripped of any ambiguity. She's a predator, a lesson. That was her job. Carry society's fears so children could sleep at night. Meanwhile, in Slavic folklore, another witch dominated the forest, Baba Yaga. She lived in a hut with chicken legs, carried a mortar and pestle through the sky, and tested anyone who crossed her path. She could devour you whole, or hand you the tool that saves your life. Her story is older than the Grimm brothers. She appears in Russian folk tales written down in the 18th and 19th centuries by collectors like Alexander Afanasiev. But unlike the Candy House hag, Baba Yaga isn't simple evil. She's liminal, she's initiation. If you were brave enough, respectful enough, or clever enough, she helped you. If not, you were dinner.
You should stay for dinner.
She embodies the forest itself, dangerous, but also the place where knowledge is won. Fast forward a few centuries later, when Walt Disney built his fairy tale empire in the early to mid-20th century. He borrowed the medieval hag from the Grimms, but polished her into a villainess we'd never forget. In Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, in 1937, Disney's first feature film, the evil queen is regal, vain, and obsessed with youth. She brews potions, disguises herself as an old crone, and hands Snow White the poisoned apple. It was based directly on the Grimm version, but Disney's animation elevated her. The first major on-screen witch, draped in velvet and crowned with envy. Before this, you did have witches in silent films and stage adaptations for Hansel and Gretel, but nothing anywhere near the global impact of Disney's Snow White. Because it was the first full-length animated feature film and a massive worldwide hit, The Queen as Witch became the definitive image of a witch for 20th century pop culture. 2 decades later came Sleeping Beauty in 1959, and with it, Maleficent, possibly the most iconic witch in film. Tall, horned, and draped in black flames, she curses a princess not out of hunger or poverty, but pure spite. Maleficent was born from Charles Perrault's La Belle au Bois Dormant from 1697, but Disney gave her more screen time, more menace, and a dragon form. She became the template for every screen witch that followed. In Charles Perrault's La Belle au Bois Dormant, the figure who curses the princess is described as a fairy, one of the fairy godmothers slighted for not being invited. Disney changed her into something darker. Maleficent is never called a witch in dialogue. She's mistress of all evil, but her role, powers, and imagery, cursing infants, summoning fire, brewing storms, transforming, overlap heavily with the witch archetype. Critics and audiences alike started calling her a witch, even if she's technically a fairy. In the 1960s, the witch showed up again in the American living room. Bewitched premiered in 1964. Samantha Stevens was a cheerful suburban wife who happened to twitch her nose and conjure magic.
You're a witch. That's what I've been trying to tell you.
The series was born in the middle of Cold War suburbia, when the American dream was having a perfect house, perfect husband, and perfect children. Samantha disrupted that image, but gently. She was powerful, but she promised to keep it hidden. Written by producer Saul Sachs and scripted by a team of sitcom writers, Bewitched recast witchcraft as domestic comedy.
How could she?
I'm afraid it's witchcraft.
Witchcraft?
Uh-huh.
For the first time, the witch wasn't burned, but her magic was always slightly dangerous, slightly unruly. Bewitched made witchcraft palatable, but in doing so, it suggested something radical, a suburban housewife who could twitch her nose and bend reality. Then came the 1990s, when witchcraft went goth. In 1996, The Craft followed 4 teenage girls who discover Wicca and use magic to fight bullies, boys, and each other. It was marketed as a teen horror film, but for many viewers, it became initiation. The film borrowed the aesthetics of real neo-pagan practice, invoking directions, circles, and deities, though some practitioners criticized the dramatization. Still, the cultural effect was massive. Witchcraft suddenly belonged to teenage girls. The message wasn't, witches are evil. It was, witches are powerful and dangerous if pushed. For a generation raised on mall culture and mean girls, the witch was rebellion itself. Black lipstick, leather chokers, and the audacity to hex a classmate. Witchcraft left the fairy tale forest and walked into high school hallways. Then came Charmed in 1998. The Halliwell sisters turned witchcraft into primetime TV. Week after week, they were the heroes. The show mixed spell books with soap opera, demons with dating drama, and made the power of three a mantra for a generation. Charmed made witches aspirational, stylish, and powerful. Of course, not all witches in the 90s were glamorous. In Roald Dahl's The Witches and its 1990 film starring Angelica Houston, witches were nightmare fuel. They peeled off their wigs, revealed clawed hands, and plotted to turn children into mice. The movie terrified kids and became a cult classic, remade in 2020. It kept alive the older fairy tale image. Witches as predators, hiding in plain sight. Not all 90s witches were gothic rebels or nightmare fuel. Some were pure chaos. Enter Hocus Pocus, which was released in 1993. Hocus Pocus resurrected the Sanderson sisters, three witches hanged in 1693 Salem, brought back to modern-day Massachusetts when a teenager lights the black flame candle. Played by Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Kathy Najimy. They're cartoonish and comedic, flying on vacuums, singing musical numbers, chasing children to steal their life force. On paper, it's ridiculous. But Hocus Pocus quietly did something radical. It made witches fun. They weren't terrifying demons or suburban housewives trying to fit in.
Oh, look. Another glorious morning. Makes me sick.
They were over-the-top villains who stole every scene.
Ugly?
Beloved precisely because they were outrageous. The film flopped at the box office on release, but grew into a cult classic through constant Halloween reruns on Disney Channel and ABC Family. By the 2000s, it was the Halloween movie for an entire generation. And when Disney released Hocus Pocus 2 in 2022, nearly 30 years later, it proved the Sanderson sisters had fully transformed from parody villains into nostalgic icons. In cultural terms, Hocus Pocus reframed witchcraft for kids, colorful, musical, and campy. The witch archetype had range. She could scare, empower, or just make you laugh. In the 1990s, Sabrina the Teenage Witch made magic safe for Friday nights, and the witch went wholesome again. Melissa Joan Hart's Sabrina was a high schooler balancing boys, algebra, and spells that usually backfired. Her talking cat Salem stole every scene. It was based on the Archie comics character and gave us a witch who turned witchcraft into family-friendly comedy. The witch wasn't scary anymore. It was now relatable. The sitcom carried Sabrina into adulthood in its later seasons. She Goes to College. It shifted tone from pure teen comedy to a slightly older coming-of-age arc, but kept the laugh track magic intact. But 2 decades later, Sabrina returned darker than ever. The chilling adventures of Sabrina on Netflix leaned into occult imagery, satanic pacts, and ritual blood. This wasn't laugh track magic anymore. it was a gothic, coming-of-age story. Netflix's chilling adventures of Sabrina reimagined her as a gothic heroine, torn between the mortal world and a coven that served the Dark Lord, with Kiernan Shipka in the role of Sabrina. Sabrina's two lives show how elastic the archetype really is. She can be sitcom comfort or occult nightmare, but in both, she's still the same thing, a teenager discovering her powers and place in this world. Together, the two Sabrinas show the full swing of the archetype. By the turn of the millennium, witchcraft wasn't as scary anymore thanks to J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, first published in 1997. The series turned witches and wizards into students at a boarding school. Rowling drew on traditional folklore, cauldrons, broomsticks, black cats, but stripped away the horror, mostly. Witchcraft became whimsical, educational, and marketable. The books sold hundreds of millions of copies, spawning films, theme parks, and a global franchise. Harry Potter reframed magic as a school subject, syllabi, OWLs, detentions. Some witches are heroes. Some are monsters in pink cardigans. Some are flat out terrifying. The horror isn't gone. It's domesticated, channeled into the dark arts, corrupt authority, and the cost of choosing wrong. But the cultural effect is huge. Magic goes mainstream. It's no longer just cauldrons in a forest hut. The archetype expands from singular villain to an entire society. Classmates, teachers, bureaucrats, rebels. Witchcraft becomes a world you want to live in and can now visit. So, what about the view of witches today? The Wiccan revival of the 20th century, sparked by Gerald Gardner's writings in the 1950s, had already reframed witchcraft as a spiritual movement. So when TikTok and YouTube came along, the witch was primed for reinvention once again. Open these apps and you'll find the witch, lighting candles, laying out tarot cards, teaching you about manifestation rituals. Under the hashtag Witchtok, billions of views have turned witchcraft into one of the internet's most enduring aesthetics. The archetype survived the stake, the cartoon, the sitcom, the blockbuster, and now she's algorithm-friendly. In the past, calling someone a witch could get them burned. Now it gets them followers. On TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, witchcraft is reframed not as heresy, but as lifestyle. Spell jars and crystals become acts of self-care. Tarot spreads become therapy sessions with archetypes instead of prescriptions. The same rituals that once drew suspicion are now welcome. There's history beneath the hashtags. Witchtok is a community. In early modern Europe, a woman practicing rituals with neighbors might have been denounced as a witch. On TikTok and YouTube, it's brand growth. For people facing burnout, economic precarity, or social isolation, the witch becomes a symbol of control and community. In other words, the witch is no longer on trial. She's thriving in this new digital age. The witch is arguably the most flexible archetype we've ever invented. She changes outfits, accents, even entire moral alignments, but the role is always the same. She is the outsider, on purpose, the one with the most knowledge. In the Middle Ages, that knowledge was herbal medicine or the wrong prayer. In fairy tales, it was how to survive famine. In the Cold War, it was power hidden in the suburbs. In the 1990s, it was teenage rebellion with a black eyeliner soundtrack. On social media, it's crystals and spell jars as self-care. The details shift, but the archetype doesn't. The witch is not completely about magic. They're about the figure who doesn't fit, the neighbor who bends the rules, who speaks to animals, walks with the other side, bends fate with herbs or words. Someone who can stir storms in a cauldron or turn enemies into pigs. Sometimes they heal. Sometimes they curse. Sometimes they just quietly watch. That's why they endure, because no matter how you dress them up, they're always carrying a power no one can quite explain. That's why they keep coming back, because every generation produces outsiders, and every outsider needs a language, an image, a story. The witch is all of those at once. And unlike vampires or ghosts, witches don't stay locked in genre. They cross over into politics, into fashion, into hashtags, into identity. That fluidity is their survival mechanism. She adapts to fear, and then she adapts to desire. That's why the archetype endures, and the witch has never died. The name just kept changing. Healer, monster, hashtag. And in every age, they're still the same figure, the one who bends the rules of being human and walks on the outside just enough to never let us forget. So now I want to hear from you. Who's your favorite witch character of all time? Let me know in the comments. If you're into the dark and strange side of things, subscribe to become a mystic seeker so you never miss a new deep dive. Thanks for watching.